Before I'd even finished unloading the last box into my new house, she was already on my driveway. Stacked bleach blonde curls, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand. She looked like she was auditioning for some reality show about angry suburban moms. "You can't leave that trailer here," she barked, pointing to my U-Haul like it had insulted her personally. "This is a deed-restricted community. HOA rules say I cut her off. Lady, I've been here less than an hour." "Let me move in before you start quoting rules." She gasped like I'd slapped her. "It's Mrs. Karen Whitbridge, president of the Oak Crest Homeowners Association, and I expect compliance, not sarcasm," I nodded slowly. "Cool, I'm River Hastings. And I expect people to knock before walking onto my property." Her lips tightened. She scribbled something on her clipboard and stormed off muttering, "Just wait till the next meeting." Fun start right now. I'm not new to HOAs, I've dealt with them before. But I've never seen one operate like Oak Crest's. Over the next few weeks, I got warnings about my trash cans being visible for 30 minutes too long, a citation for my mailbox being non-standard beige, and a full-on violation notice for hanging a wind chime on my porch. A wind chime. Every notice was signed by Karen Whitbridge. I knew the type. Power-hungry, bored, and obsessed with rules because they had nothing else going on. But what she didn't know was I wasn't just some random guy buying into her kingdom. I'd done my research. See, I own a small real estate business. I don't just buy homes, I buy land and clubhouses. That's right, 3 years ago my company bought a foreclosed property with a decent-sized building on it. We renovated it and started leasing it out. Guess who the current tenant is? The Oak Crest HOA. That fancy clubhouse they hold their little meetings in. The one where they post banners about community unity while fining people into oblivion. Yeah, I own it, and I've got the lease agreement to prove it. The best part. They signed the lease under a different board president back when they were desperate to stay afloat. Karen clearly never read the fine print, or the renewal clauses. So when I got my 5th violation letter, this one about my non-compliant patio furniture, I decided it was time to have a little fun. I waited until the next HOA meeting, which of course was being held in my clubhouse. I showed up 10 minutes early, wearing a clean button-up and carrying a folder. Karen was already inside, rearranging chairs like she was hosting a royal banquet. She spotted me and narrowed her eyes. "This meeting is for board members and homeowners only?" I smiled. "Good thing I'm both," she scoffed. "You're not on the board." "No," I said, walking past her to the front of the room. "But I do own the building, which makes me your landlord." You could have heard a pin drop. Her hand froze mid-clipboard. I opened my folder, pulled out a copy of the lease agreement and placed it on the table in front of her. "This is the rental agreement you've been operating under, signed 3 years ago. Monthly payments still on time, thank you very much." Karen's face drained of all color. I continued, "According to this, I have full authority to inspect the premises at any time, request use of the facility for personal or business events, and if needed, terminate the lease with a 30-day notice without cause." Karen tried to find her voice. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, "and I will, unless some things around here start to change." She looked around to the board members, clearly expecting backup, but most of them were staring at the lease agreement like it was a nuclear warhead. "Let me put it this way," I leaned closer. "You want to keep using my building to run your little HOA empire? Then stop harassing me over my mailbox color." "Got it." Karen looked like she was chewing gravel, but she didn't say a word. Karen didn't say a word the rest of the meeting. Not because she was scared her jaw was clenched hard enough to grind diamonds, but because she knew she couldn't argue with a signed lease. The rest of the board kept looking between her and the document like it was a live grenade. I didn't need to say anything else. I'd planted the seed. Now I just had to let it grow. Over the next few days, the violation letters stopped showing up. I came home one afternoon to find my wind chime still swaying peacefully, undisturbed. Trash pickup day came and went without any warnings. For a second, I thought they'd finally gotten the message. Then I noticed something strange. My mailbox was leaning to the side. Not broken, not damaged, just shifted like someone had loosened it. A few bolts were missing. Nothing major, but just enough to make it look like I hadn't secured it properly. 2 days later, I received a notice taped to my door. Unstable mailbox safety hazard violation of community safety standards fine, $150. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. That's how far she was willing to go, unscrewing hardware in the middle of the night just to manufacture a violation. I took the letter inside and filed it. I wasn't going to pay it, obviously, but I was definitely going to use it. That weekend, I installed 2 discrete cameras. One pointed at my driveway, the other covered the mailbox and sidewalk. I didn't tell anyone, just let it roll. A week went by. No incidents. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m. on a Thursday, my phone pinged, motion detected. I pulled up the feed. Sure enough, a figure in a hoodie was crouched by the mailbox. They had a flashlight and what looked like a wrench. I zoomed in. The person stood up for a second to adjust something and pulled the hood back. Karen, she looked both ways and then went back to fiddling with the bolts. I watched her actually remove the entire top half of the mailbox, drop it into a bag, and walk off like she was taking out the trash. The next morning, another notice was taped to my front door. Mailbox missing. Emergency safety violation. HOA will replace at homeowner's expense. $300. I didn't even bother pulling it down. I just took a photo of it hanging there and added it to the folder labeled evidence. That afternoon, I filed a police report. Tampering with private mailboxes is a federal offense, and I had video. I made sure to drop off a copy at the station along with a printed timestamp from the security feed and the signed HOA violation note that conveniently matched the crime. The officer raised an eyebrow when he saw the footage. "She's the HOA president?" he asked. "Yep, bold move." "Oh, she's just getting started," he nodded. "We'll open a case, and you might want to let the postal inspector handle part of this. It crosses federal lines." I thanked him and left. That evening, I attended the board's open forum meeting, mandatory once a quarter. The clubhouse was half full, mostly with residents who'd given up trying to fight the board and now just showed up to quietly seethe. Karen walked in 10 minutes late, acting like she owned the building. I stood near the back, leaning against the wall. She didn't see me at first. The meeting kicked off with her droning on about landscaping budgets and lawn maintenance guidelines. People looked bored. Then she casually slipped in the new mailbox compliance initiative, which, according to her, would help prevent safety hazards and community liability. When she asked for a vote to approve a new $500 fine structure for non-regulation mailboxes, I stepped forward. "Before we vote," I said loudly, "I'd like to show the room something." She froze mid-sentence. The rest of the board looked confused. I pulled out a small projector from my bag and set it on the table. "Security footage," I said, "from my property." Last Thursday morning, the projector flicked on. The timestamp was clear. So was the figure on screen crouching by the box. Several people gasped. Someone in the front row whispered, "Is that Karen?" The video kept rolling. Her face was unmistakable. I turned to the board. "I've already submitted this to the local police, and the postal inspector's office has opened a federal case. Tampering with private mailboxes is a felony." Karen's eyes darted toward the exit. She didn't move. One of the board members leaned forward. "Karen, is this real?" She didn't answer. I stepped closer to the front. "And let me make this very clear. If any retaliation comes my way, more footage goes public. I've got cameras covering my entire property now. And I've got no problem pressing charges for trespassing." Karen reached for her clipboard, but no one was listening anymore. A dozen residents were pulling out their phones, snapping pictures of the video, the timestamp, and her face. "Meeting adjourned," one of the board members said abruptly. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but another board member added, "Yeah, this is done for tonight." She stood there frozen as people filed out, whispering and shaking their heads. I packed up the projector and walked past her. She looked at me, teeth clenched. "You think this makes you untouchable?" "No," I said. "It makes me prepared." The next morning, a sheriff's deputy showed up at her house. I didn't see her get cuffed, but I did see the cruiser parked outside for over an hour. When it pulled away, she wasn't in her yard anymore. The board tried to keep things quiet, but word spread fast. By the weekend, half the neighborhood knew. A group of residents started organizing a petition for a recall election. Turns out, Karen had racked up quite a few enemies, people who'd kept quiet for years because they didn't think they had any power. Now they knew otherwise. I started getting thank you notes in my mailbox. One guy dropped off a 6-pack and said, "You cracked the dam wide open, man." I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because I hate bullies. Always have. And Karen had built a kingdom on fear and manipulation. All it took was one video to bring it crashing down. But the clubhouse was still under lease, and I had other plans for it. By Monday morning, the energy in Oak Crest had shifted. Residents who'd once kept their heads down were now stopping each other on sidewalks, sharing stories, comparing old letters, and more importantly, organizing. Karen's name was on everyone's tongue, but now in past tense. No one had seen her since the sheriff's cruiser pulled away from her house, not even the board members. One guy down the block claimed she'd left town for a family emergency. Another swore he saw her packing her SUV at sunrise. No one really cared why she was gone. They just cared that she was. I spent that morning drafting a formal notice of lease adjustment and dropped it off with the remaining board members. Nothing dramatic, just a requirement that all future community meetings be scheduled through me directly, and that any events held in the clubhouse needed to be approved 72 hours in advance. With Karen out of the picture, they didn't protest. One of them, Alan, even thanked me for stepping in when things got out of hand. Out of hand? I raised an eyebrow as I signed the last document. You all let her run this place like a private dictatorship. Alan looked down at the table. We didn't know what she was doing. Not everything? You didn't want to know, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded once quietly, then left without further comment. That afternoon, I met with a few neighbors who'd asked me to look over some of their HOA-related documents. Among them was a retired machinist named Glenn who'd lived on Oak Crest Lane since the late 80s. He brought out a folder stuffed with old newsletters, payment notices, and incident logs, every piece of correspondence he'd ever received from the HOA. "Take a look at this," he said, laying out a faded letter from 5 years ago. "They fined me for repainting my fence without permission. Only thing is, I never touched the fence, not once." The letter was signed by the then vice president of the board. The same name appeared on 5 other documents in Glenn's folder, each issuing fines or citations without any documented inspections, photos, or confirmation. That name, Carolyn Reese, was still on the board today. I started cross-referencing Glenn's paperwork with other residents' files. It didn't take long to spot a pattern. Dozens of fines had been issued over the years without backup documentation. Worse, some of the payment checks had been made out directly to names, not to the HOA or its official account. By evening, I'd identified over 30 instances where money appeared to have gone into personal accounts. The total? A little over $20,000 spread across 6 years. Not a massive sum in the grand scheme of things, but more than enough to qualify as embezzlement. The next step was obvious. I contacted a friend from my college days, Aisha, now an assistant district attorney for the county. We met at a diner outside town limits. I brought a copy of the evidence, including scan checks, resident testimonies, and a list of dates and board members involved. She flipped through the documents slowly, eyes narrowing the deeper she got. "This is clean work," she said eventually. "You sure you want to press this?" "They stole from people who trusted them," I replied. "Older folks, veterans, single parents. If this doesn't get prosecuted, what's the point of having laws?" She tapped her pen on the table, weighing her options. "I'll run it through the fraud unit. If even half of this holds up, it's going to get ugly for them." "Good. A week later, subpoenas hit 6 board members. Carolyn Reese was arrested at her job at a local insurance agency. Another board member, Patrick, had already lawyered up by the time investigators reached his door. The community buzzed with every new update. I didn't say much I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. The board collapsed. 3 of the remaining members resigned within 72 hours of Carolyn's arrest. The remaining 2 couldn't legally conduct meetings without a quorum, which meant officially the HOA was frozen. No new violations, no fines, no enforcement, but I saw an opportunity. With the HOA in chaos and the clubhouse lease under my control, I called a public town meeting, not a board meeting, but an open forum for homeowners. I posted flyers at every mailbox, handed out printed notices, and even went door to door to invite people personally. The turnout was massive. People filled the clubhouse to capacity, lining the walls and standing in doorways. I stood at the front, not as a landlord or a business owner, but as a neighbor. "I'm not here to run your HOA," I said. "But I am going to make sure it doesn't go back to what it was." One man from the back raised his hand. "You gonna replace it with something else?" "No," I said. "You are." I handed the floor to a small committee I'd helped form from among the residents' people with no ties to the old board, no history of fines or citations, and no interest in power for power's sake. A schoolteacher, a retired firefighter, a single mom who ran her own bakery. Good people. They proposed dissolving the current board entirely and holding a full community election in 60 days. Every position would be up for grabs. No appointments, no handpicking. Just ballots, transparency, and a clean slate. The crowd erupted in applause. I stepped back, letting the new committee explain the logistics. When the meeting ended, neighbors came up to shake my hand, swap stories, and tell me what they planned to do with their newfound voice. One woman, Clara, looked like she'd been holding something in for years. "I used to be afraid," she said. "Every time I saw a letter from the HOA, I'd panic, but now it feels like we're taking our neighborhood back." That night, I walked home under a sky full of stars, a warm breeze cutting through the trees. The wind chime on my porch played a soft tune, untouched and unbothered. But my work wasn't quite done. 2 weeks later, I received a formal notice from a law firm representing former board member Patrick. It accused me of orchestrating a targeted campaign to undermine the legitimacy of the Oak Crest HOA and demanded that I cease all further actions interfering with the governance of homeowners' affairs. I scanned the letter, filed it under desperate threats, and forwarded it to Aisha. She called me the next morning, laughing. "He's suing you for exposing his crimes, apparently. Let him try. We've got his financial records now. He's the one who should be worried." I didn't hear anything else from Patrick's lawyer. But I did hear from the county clerk's office. A trial date had been set for the embezzlement charges early October. Just after the HOA's newly scheduled election, as for the clubhouse, I made one final change. I rewrote the lease. No more automatic renewals. No more vague language. The new agreement gave residents the option to buy the building outright for $1, provided they held democratic elections and passed annual transparency audits. If they failed to meet those conditions, I'd continue leasing it, but only to a board elected by majority vote. I sent the revised lease to the new committee. They accepted it unanimously. And just like that, the building that once housed a petty empire became the foundation of something better. Not because I owned it, but because the people finally did. The morning after the new lease was signed, I walked across my lawn with a coffee cup in one hand and a folder of documents in the other. The sky was dull with an overcast hang, but it didn't matter. Oak Crest had changed direction and the momentum was real. What had started as a battle over a mailbox had turned into a full-fledged neighborhood reckoning. Still, there was one thread left dangling, one that hadn't fully unraveled. My security footage had taken down Karen for tampering with my property. The financial records had exposed Carolyn and the others for pocketing HOA money. But something in the pattern of those payments had bothered me from the beginning. Not just the amounts or the frequency, but the gaps. There were payments listed from homeowners who swore they never paid a dime. One widower, Mr. Langford, had supposedly paid over $600 in landscaping compliance fines 2 years ago. But his memory was sharp, and his records were meticulous. He'd never written a check in that amount, and certainly not to the name listed on the ledger. Community Services Consultant Group. The name sounded official, but I couldn't find any trace of such a company registered in the state. That wasn't just suspicious, it could be criminal. I took it to Aisha, who was already deep into prosecution prep for the embezzlement trial. She scanned the name and leaned back in her chair. "This wasn't mentioned in the original batch," she said. "It wasn't in the core finances. It's buried in a separate homeowner ledger. Hidden in plain sight." "That's not just fraud," she said. "That could cross into racketeering." I raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Completely. If they created a fake consulting company to funnel money through and that company never existed legally, it's a shell. And if multiple people were signing off on those entries, that's conspiracy." She picked up her phone and called someone in her department. Within minutes, a formal request for deeper financial investigation was filed. That same afternoon, a forensics team began combing through the HOA's past 5 years of financial records, every line item, every vendor, every transaction. 3 days later, I got a call. Aisha's voice was sharp. "River, you're going to want to hear this in person." We met that night in her office. She slid a folder across the table. They created a fake third-party vendor during Karen's first year as president. The name was registered to a PO box 3 towns over. The payments were sent regularly, always just under thresholds that would trigger audits. Who was collecting? A bank account in Patrick's name, but guess who authorized the vendor? She turned over a sheet, Carolyn's signature. "And here's the kicker," Aisha said. "They used the vendor to bill for services that were never performed: tree trimming, sidewalk repairs, irrigation upgrades. None of it ever happened, but the HOA charged residents. They billed the fake company, and the money disappeared." I shook my head. "How much?" "Over 60,000, she paused, "and it gets worse." She handed me a list of names. They sent letters to homeowners threatening liens on their properties if they didn't pay these maintenance charges. We've confirmed at least 4 homes were sold under duress. Families who couldn't fight the legal threats and decided to move rather than risk foreclosure. That wasn't just greed. That was cruelty. I looked at the list. One name stood out, the DeLucas, a young couple who'd moved out the year before I arrived. I remembered hearing a vague story that they'd left after a dispute, but no one had known the details. They extorted people out of their homes. Aisha nodded. And with the forged legal notices, it's not just civil liability. It's criminal. We're filing charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to extort, and misuse of private financial instruments. Will they all be indicted? Patrick, Carolyn, and Karen for sure. 2 others are being investigated. One of them was a notary who certified the fake lien notices. The other worked for the title company Karen's cousin owned. He expedited the property transfers. I stood up, pacing slowly. They weaponized the HOA to force people out. To steal their equity. Aisha's voice was calm but firm. And now we're going to bury them with that evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, the story exploded. Local news ran a full segment titled "Power, Property, and Corruption: The Fall of Oak Crest HOA." Interviews with displaced families aired alongside footage of Karen being led out of her driveway in cuffs. Patrick was arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to Arizona. Carolyn turned herself in with an attorney present. The others weren't far behind. The neighborhood was stunned. None of them had imagined it would go this deep. At the next community forum, held again in the clubhouse, I stood off to the side as the new committee spoke to residents. No podiums. No clipboards, just folding chairs and honest talk. "I don't think anyone here wants to go back to the old way," said Marcus, the retired firefighter now chairing the interim board. "So we're not. We're rewriting the charter top to bottom. No more fines without evidence. No more threats. No more closed-door decisions." People applauded. Not the polite kind, but the cathartic kind. The kind that echoed off the walls and made the windows rattle. I left before the meeting ended. It wasn't about me anymore, and it shouldn't be. The neighborhood didn't just need a new board. It needed to believe in itself again. The next morning, I took the final step. I filed paperwork with the county clerk to donate the clubhouse to the Oak Crest Community Trust. No strings, no rent, just ownership. Permanent. Irrevocable. The building was theirs now. When I handed the deed to Marcus, he looked at me like I'd just handed him a winning lottery ticket. "You sure?" he asked. "I bought it to keep it out of the wrong hands," I said. "Now it's in the right ones." He nodded, gripping the folder tightly. "We'll take care of it. I know." As I walked back home, I passed the fence line where the HOA used to hang their warning signs. The posts were bare now. Someone had taken them down. Across the street, Glenn was planting new flowers. Clara was repainting her front door bright red. A color that would have triggered a fine 6 months ago. Now it was just a color. A few kids rode past me on bikes, laughing, their wheels skimming the sidewalk that had once been labeled non-compliant for having a crack in the concrete. No one cared anymore. At my doorstep, I paused. The wind chime rang again, caught in a light breeze. It sounded different now, not louder, just clearer. Inside, my phone buzzed. A message from Aisha, all 6 indicted. Trial date set, victim restitution fund in progress. Justice had taken root, not because of one man's lease, but because when power is built on fear, all it takes is one person willing to push back and a community ready to follow.